When you picture Oxford, what comes to mind? Probably a quiet, serene sanctuary of ancient libraries and those famous dreaming spires, right? Well, in today's Explainer, we're going to see that Oxford is definitely not just a static place of learning. Actually, it is, and always has been, a dynamic, chaotic battleground of contrasting identities. We're going to unpack 2,000 years of brilliant, messy friction to understand how this iconic city really came to be.
Triumph and tragedy, genius and brutality. I know, it sounds literally like the tagline for a summer blockbuster, but it perfectly describes the true, unvarnished history of this world-famous city. You see, Oxford's story isn't some peaceful, linear climb to academic glory. Not at all. It's a story built on disease, riots, royal sieges, and literal physical walls dividing its own citizens.
So here is our roadmap for the Explainer. First, the fortified river crossing. 2, town, gown, and bloodshed. 3, Reformation and Royalist stronghold. 4, the age of industry. 5, world wars and wonder drugs. And finally, 6, the modern paradox.
Starting off with Section 1, the fortified river crossing.
Long before the university, archaeological evidence shows we had Roman pottery kilns operating here as early as 100 AD. They came, made their pots, and left. But the real foundation, that starts with the Saxons. The name Oxford literally means a shallow ford where oxen crossed. It was just a muddy river crossing. By 727 AD, legend has it a Saxon princess named Fritiswide set up a monastery, which gave the area its first spiritual anchor. But jump forward to 1068, and things get pretty brutal. William the Conqueror's Normans roll in and build the massive stone Oxford Castle. And this wasn't some pretty ornamental palace. It was a weapon built specifically to intimidate and subjugate the locals. So Oxford was really born out of practical survival and raw military force.
Moving to Section 2, town, gown, and bloodshed.
You know, the origin of the university itself is practically a historical accident. Back in 1167, King Henry II was furious with France. So, what does he do? He completely bans English students from attending the University of Paris. All these displaced, highly educated young men needed somewhere to go, and they ended up flooding into centrally located Oxford. Overnight, the town is just bursting with scholars needing rented rooms and lodging. So now you have this massive influx of privileged scholars mixing with hardworking locals, and well, violent clashes begin almost immediately. The core of this friction basically came down to two groups. On one side, you have the town, the hardworking locals. They intensely resented these privileged kids coming in, driving up local rents, and acting like they were totally above the law. On the other side, you have the gown, the rowdy, arrogant scholars. They often treated the town like their own personal playground, and infuriatingly for the locals, they were frequently exempt from local legal jurisdiction. These were two incredibly divided identities occupying the exact same medieval streets, and it set the stage for literal centuries of riots.
The absolute climax of all this tension is crystallized in one shocking number, 63. That is the number of students killed in a single event, the St. Scholastica's Day riot in 1355. And you want to know how this massive, 3-day bloodbath kicked off? 2 students were at a local tavern, complained about the quality of their wine, threw their drinks right in the landlord's face, and boom, all of Oxford descends into brutal violence with swords and bows. 63 students and 30 townspeople died over a bad pint of wine.
Section 3, Reformation and Royalist stronghold. This is a city that has been repeatedly scarred by national history. For instance, in 1555 and 1556, Queen Mary, infamously known as Bloody Mary, burned 3 Protestant bishops at the stake, literally right in Broad Street. Then, less than a century later during the English Civil War, King Charles I is driven out of London and actually makes Oxford his royalist capital. Those beautiful, pristine college quadrangles, they were turned into military barracks, ammunition stores, and weapon workshops. The city was besieged, starved, and deeply traumatized. Yet, it somehow survived, rebuilt, and eventually hosted the last English Parliament held outside London in 1681, all while growing into this massive intellectual powerhouse with the stunning new Bodleian Library.
But we really have to address the paradox of this era. During the 18th century, which is often hailed as its age of reason, giving us minds like John Locke and Adam Smith, beneath that brilliant intellectual surface, the university was astonishingly exclusionary. Religious tests meant Catholics, Protestant dissenters, and Jews were flat out not allowed to attend. Women were completely barred. The curriculum was rigidly stuck in the past. It was a place of immense, glittering privilege that was, ironically, highly resistant to actual social progress.
Moving on to Section 4,
The age of industry.
To put the city's evolution into perspective, look at the population shift. In 1801, Oxford was still just a small town of about 12,000 people. But by 1901, that population exploded to 49,000. The major catalyst for this was the arrival of the Great Western Railway in 1844, bringing a sudden influx of factories and manufactured goods. Oxford wasn't just a sleepy university town anymore. Whole new working-class suburbs were springing up and completely redefining the city's demographic landscape.
And then in 1896, a local businessman named William Morris founded Morris Motors in a small local garage. It started out modest, but it eventually grew into one of Britain's most massive automobile manufacturers. This one business venture essentially created a brand new, incredibly strong working-class identity for the Cowley area of Oxford. Suddenly, the ancient elite university had a loud industrial rival humming right in its own backyard.
Which brings us to Section 5, World Wars and Wonder Drugs.
While the auto factories shifted their gators to build munitions for the World Wars, a totally different kind of creation was brewing right down the street. A group of writers known as the Inklings, most famously J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, were meeting in a local Oxford pub called the Eagle and Child. Both men were World War I veterans, deeply affected by the horrors of trench warfare. They'd sit there, drinking pints, debating mythologies, and channeling the trauma of modern mechanized war into works that absolutely redefined fantasy literature forever. Pure literary genius happening right inside a noisy local pub.
Now, this era is the ultimate encapsulation of the Oxford paradox. On the one hand, in 1942, scientists in an Oxford lab figured out how to purify and mass-produce penicillin, saving millions of lives globally. In 1954, Roger Bannister, an Oxford medical student, shattered human athletic limits by running the first ever 4-minute mile. Incredible, right? Yet, at the exact same time they were breaking these massive human barriers, the city was actively enforcing deep physical divisions. Back in 1934, private developers built 9-foot-high brick walls in Cutslow, topped with menacing revolving iron spikes, for the sole purpose of separating a newly built working-class council estate from wealthy private homes. People literally had to walk miles out of their way just to get around them. These absurd, grotesque monuments to class division stood right across public streets for 25 years before they were finally demolished in 1959.
Finally, Section 6, the modern paradox.
So, where does that leave us today? Well, on one hand, you still have that romanticized view of ancient exclusivity. The dreaming spires, the elite traditions, and honestly, extortionately expensive housing that is pushing local families out. But right up against that is the modern reality. The working-class auto plants that are still running, a hugely diverse population of global students, and cutting-edge pharmaceutical labs. You can literally walk from a cobblestoned medieval quadrangle into an industrial neighborhood in about 5 minutes. It's two entirely different worlds that are still constantly rubbing up against each other.
And yet, despite, or maybe honestly because of, its incredibly messy history, Oxford's influence today is just staggering. We're talking 28 UK prime ministers and over 70 Nobel winners having walked its streets. In science, the university co-developed the COVID-19 AstraZeneca vaccine, distributing it to billions worldwide. And over in industry, that exact same Cawley auto plant, which is now owned by BMW, is still churning out the iconic Mini. The global impact across all these different sectors is absolutely massive.
From a muddy river crossing to violent tavern riots, royal sieges, literary genius, and global scientific breakthroughs, Oxford is a city built entirely on relentless, brilliant friction. So, the question is, how will it balance its ancient, exclusive past with the extremely demanding realities of its diverse, cutting-edge future? It's a challenge every ancient city faces, but honestly, no one does it quite like Oxford. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history beneath your feet.